We do all kinds of things here at Word in Your Ear.
Videocasts like this.
Podcasts like this.
Crowdcast events with famous authors.
Live quizzes.
And we can guarantee to make your next birthday one you'll never forget.
There's only one way to guarantee getting all of this, to getting it before anybody else, and that's to sign on to be a supporter on Patreon.
Full details at this address.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a view.
Welcome to another Word in Your Attic. David and I are great admirers of the Backlisted podcast, which rereads and enthuses about great books from the past. And when they invited us on their Beatles special at the Port Eliot Festival a couple of years back, one of their number took to the stage in a specially knitted, beautifully psychedelic, exact replica of the tank top worn by Paul McCartney in Magical Mystery Tour. And for that alone, he deserves our international applause. Please welcome aboard the great Andy Miller.
Thank
and Andy, you're
Thank
wearing
you.
almost exactly the same thing today, except it isn't kind of red and gold.
I thought I'd wear a different one, but because you sent me a picture of some guy called Paul McCartney in the Times the other day wearing that tank top, I thought, well, I can't let that guy rip me off. I got to keep moving. I got to keep innovating with the slipovers.
Absolutely, lovely to see you. And where do we join? You're in? Is it Whitstable in Kent?
Yeah, we're in Whitstable in Kent. I can if I had the curtains open, I could see it over the sea over there, which has been a great boon during the last year or so. It has been great.
You go out for walks and you walk by the sea, can you?
It's quite, yeah. I mean, I tend to go out quite early or quite late. The thing about, I mean, Whitstable is quite touristy. If the restaurants were open, it would be very touristy indeed.
Right.
People like to come up here for Sunday lunch and that kind of thing. But there are still quite a lot of people around, which is okay. You know, I think people drive a short distance, get out, keep in their bubbles and their groups and socially distanced. But right. if you go out at lunchtime, you know, there's still quite a lot of people around on the seafront. So I tend to sneak out in the mornings and walk the dog.
But you're very fortunate to have the sea to look at.
Yeah, we feel really blessed. Yeah.
We love your backdrop. I mean, that's not wallpaper. I mean,
do you want me to prove it?
Specially done for the Zoom.
Shall I prove it? Hang on, look.
Pick a book.
Pick a book. That's great.
There's a nice big book about Wes Anderson there.
Oh, okay, very nice.
There was
what's your policy? What's your policy on books, Andy? Do you collect them in an organised fashion, or do you just end up like I do with records and books? I just have an accumulation.
I mean, I'm not going to move this round to show you, but if you could see just over to this all looks very ordered and sane. And then just down there where you can't see, stacks and stacks and stacks.
Teetering piles.
Things that have come in for Backlisted or books that I've picked up or books that I keep meaning to get round to. I don't know about you. Did you both work in record shops?
No, I never did. Dave did. Dave worked at the HMV for years.
Well, I worked in, we'll come on to this later, but I mean, I worked in bookshops in the early 90s. And that sort of cured me really of too much bibliomania in terms of how I organized books. I felt if I wanted books in alphabetical order where I could find them, I got that at work. So what I tend to do is shelve by enthusiasm or feeling, or like the books behind me I tend to have read most of those, and they tend to be things I like to look at or just reference or pull down, or I don't know, like. I mean, we'll talk about this in a little while.
So you mean they're themed by
there's Jimmy Webb's autobiography there.
The Cake and the Ray. Yes. Yeah.
And that lives next to Michael Nesmith's autobiography.
Oh, fantastic. Didn't even know he'd written one.
Nor did I. I'd love to read that. Is it true then that he went to a Monkeys gig in disguise once? Is that mentioned in there? He was always rumoured to have gone to see the Monkeys when they reformed, which of course he hadn't bothered to rejoin. But he had to go and see them. And he went in disguise with a kind of false beard. So is that right?
I think that is probably true. I think Nez has a very...
Nez,
as we call him.
Yeah.
Has a very... I don't know. He seems to have, like a lot of these guys do, he seems to have quite a conflicted relationship with the Monkees. With the brand. He would hate to be associated only with it.
Yeah,
it's not all about the money. I know you've talked about this kind of thing before, but for these guys, I don't think it is about the money. It's about feeling there was an achievement there and they had some part of it. And so why shouldn't it belong to them rather than
absolutely.
Bob Rafelson?
But they've also got the personal memories of all the sour relationships with not necessarily with the band, but with whoever managed them or whatever. You know what I mean? They remember the day when they decided to do that. Whereas we only remember the product, what they did. They remember what it cost them to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they can never quite shake that off. And I don't blame them at all.
I spoke to someone who worked on one of the reunion Monkees tours. This must have been about 10 years ago. And he was, when I saw him, he was looking really stressed. I said, how's it been? He goes, oh man, it's been an absolute nightmare. Yeah, Davy Jones, right? And I went, well, is he drinking? He said, no, that's not the problem. The problem is he's not drinking.
Oh dear.
We can say that because
he's no longer with us.
Who is no longer with us.
Yeah,
but sadly.
Can you imagine?
But the reason being, the serious point being that they were, if they were on it, they were far more likely to be saying, why does it sound like that? Where's this? Where's the money? Where's the where are we there is a kind of benefit if they're kind of zonked out and not quite with it. You can road manage them in a different way. So
the only disadvantage is then produce lobotomized stage performances presumably as well. But then you've got the money, so move on.
True.
How has lockdown been, apart from doing your Yellow Submarine jigsaws?
We'll come on to that as well.
Yeah,
How's it been?
Yeah.
Quite hard, really. I mean, we're not here to. Everyone's dealing with their own things, aren't they, and their own hardships. But I don't know how you guys have felt about doing these, but on Backlisted, me and John Mitchinson, my co-host, we're always saying it's just been a lifeline for us. I mean,
absolutely, I think that's true. I'm sure you're right. I was only thinking about this morning. We do these things very often. People at the end of it, they're so grateful. It's like a little bit of therapy for the person who's done it. And but it's also partly for us, that you just sit there and talk about things that don't matter for half an hour.
David, that's exactly it.
Yes.
We've all got just over there outside of frame. There's who knows what personal traumas to be dealing with, and children to pilot through exams or not exams, and parents who you can't see, and all that stuff. And when John and I and Nikki, our producer, get together once a week now, because we do a Backlisted every fortnight, and then we do a Patreons only lot listed every fortnight. When we get together, it is an hour, a bit longer sometimes, of just having that opportunity to talk about books and films and music and not try and bring one another down too much. Actually, just
we do it more than once a day anyway. We just have to record one of them. But otherwise, there is this urge to suddenly discuss the Edgar Broughton band or something, and it just, it's nice. It's a nice distraction from what's going on outside the window.
And if not now, when?
Yeah, exactly.
Carpe diem, Mark. Carpe diem.
Absolutely.
This is precisely what they're thinking behind Word in Your Attic. If you can't show off some stupid record that you bought in 1964 and you don't know why you bought it, if you can't do it now, when can you do it?
Yeah, a lot of people we've talked to.
What have you got to show us? What have you? Because I know you've been thinking about what you could, what you might care to share.
So you mentioned, didn't you, the yellow? So we've been doing a Yellow Submarine jigsaw because obviously my whole family is obliged to be on brand on social media. But we actually got we got a new game this Christmas and an old game. So I thought I'd show you what those were first that we've been playing.
Okay,
right?
no, sure.
So this was the big hit of Christmas Day.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic.
That's a game. No,
so that's a board game.
Yeah, it's a board game, right? It's the Jaws board game. And
so you land on 6, you get a bigger boat or whatever. And
right, so it's in 2 acts.
Right.
It's the first act is on Amity Island.
Oh, brilliant.
You can see where you one of you is the shark, another one is the mayor, another one is Richard Dreyfuss, and
The other Robert Shaw.
Robert Shaw, who everyone
fantastic.
wants to be Robert Shaw.
Yeah,
clearly.
absolutely.
So that's the first act. That's
Put
quite
on the
good.
accent for the
And,
notes.
it's got some little game cards that say things like, it's like chance in Monopoly, but instead of chance, it says feeding frenzy. Shark may eat all swimmers at beach. So
Other little pieces. Do you get?
Yeah.
little
Hang on.
miniature-
Yeah.
Oh, I want to see those.
Right, and then the second act is you're on the boat, and the shark eats bits of the boat, and you fight back with harpoon guns and say, "Smile, you son of a bitch," and that cut to your own child, and that kind of thing. And there's like a little, and when the shark emerges,
lift it up.
There
a
it
bit,
is.
Yeah. Oh,
that's perfect.
fantastic.
Coming out of the table. Yeah.
so that was really good fun. It did take about 3 hours to get the hang of the rules. We decided that to psychologically to treat that as part of the game.
Yeah, sure.
But it was pretty good. So we played that, and then we dug out this old favorite, which I thought you would like to see. The TV game of Hancock.
Oh my God, that's fantastic.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
Chad Valley as well.
That's almost an armful. So do you get how does that work?
Okay, so look, I'll show you I've got the gameplay pieces here, right?
Yeah.
So you've got like a little that's how you move. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's the dice. Yeah.
That's the dice. You've got little Hancock heads that you put on sticks.
Oh,
you see those in the box? There they are.
Lovely.
Incredible.
And you got some. I mean, this was made in the 50s.
Where did you get that from? Is that
My
money?
friend, I've wanted one for years, and my friend Ian Edmund, who might be watching this, found one on eBay. I mean, in pretty good condition. But the best.
I gotta say, you're very fortunate if all the bits were there.
All the bits are still there.
Can you see that?
Yes.
So that's the board game. That's East Cheam.
Oh,
Borough of East Cheam. And there you, I know, right? And you've got Fred's Pie Stall is in here.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Railway cuttings, pawnbrokers.
Is the public library in there, Andy? Is the public library there? I was only thinking about the other day.
Yes, the EC library. I know what you're going to say, Dave. What?
Well, I thought I couldn't resist this the other day. I thought, God bless Hancock. Because when the public, every year you get, or whatever it is, you get from the public lending right, you get your little check or whatever for, according to how many people have borrowed your books from the library. And I said on Twitter, thank you very much for everybody who borrowed my books. If it was only to make a pile in order to stand on and reach Lady Don't Fall Backwards from the top shelf. And I thought, God bless Hancock. That it was in there. Something
Look, the EC library, it was in there that Hancock borrowed Lady Don't Fall Backwards.
Absolutely.
If this is like an M.R. James story, if I look very closely and I could see you or me in the window there, that would be a terrible thing.
Well, I'm very envious of your Hancock game. That's
brilliant.
But we have actually played that. It's,
possibly lost on the kids. Dare I venture?
Yeah, that one was a bit lost on the kids. You could mix that up with the Jaws game. That would be quite interesting. Wouldn't it? Robert Shaw rampaging round East Cheam. I used to live with one of Robert Shaw's sons, Ian Shaw, who's a really charming guy, an actor. And he was in a terrific show in Edinburgh in 2019 about the making of Jaws, where he played his own father, which is something that he'd resisted for many, many years. It was absolutely superb. And obviously quite a big thing for Ian to do that. And because he didn't really know his dad. His dad, he was quite young when his dad died. So to kind of take ownership of that and take ownership of Jaws, and he does look really quite like Robert Shaw at the same time as well. So I doubt Ian would play the Jaws game, but he might play the Hancock game. So
Oh, that's fantastic! I'm very pleased with those. Have you got any early records you bought? Anything? Do you remember the first record you bought? Anything like that?
Yeah, the first single that I bought with my own money was the first single I bought with my own money, I think, was "Dreaming" by Blondie. The first LP that I owned, which my mum and dad bought me, was "Wombling Songs" by the Wombles.
Well, we only had Mike Batt on the show the other day.
Well, it's such an interesting record so Mike Batt's kind of like 60s, you know, he's toiling away in the psychedelia mines in the late 60s.
Yeah.
But he breaks through in the early 70s. And the first record that he makes, that Wombling Songs album, I realized it's in a kind of reverse takeover. My great love of the Beatles and of the Kinks and all those kind of 60s chamber pop groups probably comes from that record, because it's like
probably does.
It's Mike Batt taking the opportunity, albeit a few years late, to make this lovely melodic 60s sounding pop record with, it's only the next one when they, you know, he can have hits, that he gets into the glam sound of "Remember You're a Womble." But
isn't it Minuetto, Allegretto, and all that sort of stuff?
Yes.
It's kind of classical, isn't it?
It sounds like if I played it to you, and there was some way of masking the word "womble" or the verb "wombling" within it, you'd say, "Well, who's this? Is this like the Zombies or the or some kind of, I don't know, the Left Bank or somebody like that?" It's that very particular, as you say, Mark, that very particular classically infused, very lots of harpsichords.
The harpsichord, string sections, completely. It's chamber pop, precisely.
He was a classical musician, wasn't he? Basically, out of the Mike Batt, you know, he talks about this on the Word in Your Attic, that he came into it via classical music, didn't he?
So I have got a copy of the Village Green Preservation.
Oh, right.
Oh, great.
About which I wrote a whole book, or one of the little 33 books. But I love the record. Yes, I did. Yeah. I love the.
Go on, tell me about that record, because
was that a record? Was it about homesickness, do you think? Because, I mean, he spent a lot of time in America, didn't he?
Yeah.
And suddenly he was overcome, I can't remember when it came out now, 68, I think, overcome with this idea of looking at his old girlfriend Daisy, and does it Johnny Thunder, the hoodlum, and Monica the prostitute, and all the characters from that village that he'd either invented or some of them were real. So was that homesickness and wishing?
I think it's one of the fascinating things about this particular Kinks record.
Yeah,
it's not the only. These aren't the only songs about, but it's certainly the only album made by young people in the 1960s about nostalgia.
Yeah, it's about Tudor houses, isn't it?
And homesickness is definitely part of that. But he kind of knows that it's phony nostalgia, that it doesn't really exist. And I say in the book, and I always think with this record, it's sort of one of the reasons I think this has become such an important document in how we think about 60s pop, because remember, this didn't sell a bean when it came out.
Absolutely. Very well received though, but it didn't sell.
But it came out the same day as
the White Album,
same
day.
And Electric Ladyland.
That shows you what a high quality record company they had in Pye, didn't it?
Exactly.
You've been fine. Put it out that day.
They weren't even aware.
Right. But I think that's part of the reasons why it sounds so good now. Is it's kind of got very muted sound. It's quite an indie sound,
right.
Which Ray Davies is always saying, well, I didn't get it quite right, or you know. So, and it wasn't a big hit, so he's sort of ambivalent about that. But also, I think the fact that a lot of the songs are about being young and nostalgia, and you know, Days isn't on this record, but Days is all part of this thing.
Yeah.
This same time period. It's about looking back. Actually, now it's about a record from the 60s, about looking back at the 60s. I think that's one of the reasons why people like it and love it. I interviewed around when I was doing this. I interviewed the members of the Kinks, and I mean, this is like in the early noughties. And even then, I don't know whether you find this when you're interviewing these guys, You know, they can remember stuff, but actually what they can remember is the story more than the event. So I had a drink with Mick Avery, the drummer, in a pub in Strand on the Green in West London, and I took this copy of the record along with me, and I gave it to him when we sat down and said, well, Mick, you know, if I just give you the record and you look at the track listing, can you just tell me if there's anything that you tell me if it jogs any memories. So he sat there, he put his glasses on, he looked at it, went, no, 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 right. And he handed it back, and I went, he went, sorry, Andy, can't remember a thing. I went, oh, well, he said, you've got to remember two things, Andy. It was a long time ago, and we were pissed all the time. You know, and I'm not saying that's true of everybody, and clearly it depends what part you played in the recording of the record. But like Ray wouldn't even sing, you know, Ray wouldn't sing the melodies to them when they were recording because he was so worried about them being stolen. So he would say the chords of this, it kind of goes like this, it's got a little jog trot beat, and then later when they'd all gone home, he'd then add the melody and the words because they were so
basically they never heard it. They never heard the record.
So Mick can probably remember sessions, but he wouldn't know they were called specific.
But also musicians can only remember the kind of the atmosphere in the studio a lot of the time, rather than the creative process. It's kind of who's arguing with who and whose song didn't get on the record or whatever. That's the problem.
Yeah. Whereas we're the ones that sat down with those records, and listened to them innumerable times and internalized them. And we expect them to know them as well as we do, and they don't really.
I went
to
the time. The launch of the big Village Green box set, the 50 years box set that came out in 2018. And first of all, it was sort of, I mean, all the surviving members of the Kinks were in that room, but refused to be photographed together. So that was in keeping with the the band. And but also that the album charted. That for the first time ever. It took 50 years for the Kinks of the Village Green Preservation Society to hit the charts. And it's thanks to, you know, old fellas like myself. Kind of, as I say,
what a run the Kinks had. Dave and I talk about this quite a lot. There were 17 incredible singles from You Really Got Me in 64 to whatever it would be, Days, I suppose, and Autumn Almanac and stuff like that in 68. What an amazing catalogue of records that they had out there.
So do you remember the 70s records coming out?
Yeah, I mean, there was Lola was that 70s? Yes.
Well, Lola was just about the 70s, wasn't it?
Come Dancing, when was that?
Well,
that's the early 80s.
A lot later.
Oh, it's 80s,
they were always. I remember things like I bought things like Muswell Hillbillies and Lola versus what's the way? Everybody's in showbiz. Everybody's a star. And what I remember in the 70s, I used to read Let It Rock magazine, which is a tiny bit highly influential magazine. You probably got a full bound set of them there.
And just up on the wall there, Dave.
And they always used to be very enthusiastic about those records. And I used to buy them, and they kind of nearly made it for me. Whereas the Kinks that I'd fallen in love with in the 60s was the kind of pithy Kinks of, you know, Waterloo Sunset and, you know, and Dedicated Follower of Fashion and all that sort of stuff.
I'm always struck by how young, you know, those veterans, you know, in not putting out these concept albums in 1975, who were 31.
Oh yeah.
You know, who'd been slogging around the circuit with an album or two a year, who'd seen these huge changes in the industry, who were seen as dinosaurs, were 20 years younger than I am now.
I know. Well, he would have been about 24, 25 around the time of Village Green. I mean, that's unbelievable amazing, when you think about it. The idea of this going back and thinking about, you know, church bells and steeples and this old one. It's incredibly sophisticated stuff.
But they'd lived this mad, accelerated life, hadn't they, for about 3 years?
Yeah.
So they felt, they had feelings that nobody had ever had before, I think.
The other thing about the song Village Green Preservation Society, that is a very... I think there's a writerly stroke readerly sensibility to a lot of those songs. Like Village Green Preservation Society isn't about any one thing. You know, it's not, we would, you know, you could say it's quite a conservative, but it isn't, because it's kind of taking the mickey out of it. But it's not a joke song. Equally, we're the Village Green Preservation Society. God bless vaudeville, God bless Donald Duck, vaudeville and variety. You know, it's not. And so I see that song being appropriated by different people for different things, and I think no, it doesn't. It's all there in the song, but there's a lot going on in the song. It's not any one thing. It's not a Brexit thing, and it's not a not pure nostalgia. It's a kind of, I don't know.
Reminds me of Under Milkwood, the Dylan Thomas, you know, that idea of the little community with its characters. You open the door of the pub and there they all are. Really interesting.
That's like and that's quite a 60s thing as well, isn't it? Like the Beatles were going to call, was it the White Album or well, Pepper is an example of that. And, you know, characters, or A Doll's House, which is what they were going to call the White Album. Yeah. Where you open the door and this is a song about this funny little person, or that, you know, so, yeah, it's really, really interesting that Mark. Yeah, homesickness though, definitely. And at the moment, I mean, who isn't homesick for, I don't know, 2019 for the old normal?
I totally agree with you.
It was great. I
know.
I'm not so struck with the new normal.
No, it'll be a wonderful rediscovery when it reoccurs, won't it? You'll think, oh my God, we can do so and so. Go to the pub, have 2 pints. That would be lovely, wouldn't it?
Now,
anyway, carry on.
I've got another thing here I wanted to talk about, because I rarely get the opportunity to talk.
No, please. That's what we're here for.
I loved your email yesterday about getting in your electric golf buggy, or it was, and driving to the Miller Archive and coming back kind of Danny Baker style, as if you're in some kind of truck.
I'm always really struck by people like Eno or Brian Ferry, who are reputed to have warehouses down in down in Brentford or something, where they have a person who you know, when a retrospective comes up at the V&A, they go, rustle something up for me.
They have an archivist. Well, I stayed once overnight at John Peel's when I was interviewing him for Word magazine, and he had outbuildings, one of which was just for 12-inch singles. And he had a guy, a really sweet guy, he's kind of local bloke, student, but kind of slightly nerdish and collectorish character, lovely bloke, whose job it was, free of all charge, unpaid, to go there and catalogue these things and make sure they're all in the right order and everything. Just the 12-inch singles. It's fantastic.
Well, I am a great connoisseur of you've both had books published. When you were asked to provide an author photograph, what did you do? Did you have one ready to go, or did you commission one, or did the publisher take one? What did you do?
I got my daughters to do it.
It took an old one.
Pretty much here where I'm standing.
Yeah. I used an old one, actually. I think I used a hippie one, because that was what the book was about, you know.
I think things have really changed in the last 10, 15 years. Like Dave was saying, he got his daughter to take one. It's much easier to get someone on to take one yourself, or get a friend to take a photo, or the digital makes all these things easier. But when my first book came out in 2002, and the publisher commissioned a shot of me, and it is the worst photo. I haven't got it here. That's how bad
they all are.
No, it's the worst photograph. It's got me going.
I was going to say, are you it's usually chin stroking. In the old days, you'd have a cigarette on the go.
Yeah,
it's kind of looking kind of pensive. And
I think that I'm a connoisseur of the terrible author photo, and it's normally those, Mark. It's normally the ones that are about selling. You read me. I'm thoughtful. You know, it's that it's that thing. And so I find them very funny, because I've had years and years in the book industry of seeing them, they come in. But I thought I'd share with you this. This is my all-time.
That would make a really good collage, wouldn't it?
Oh, go on.
Go on anyway. Go on. Let's see.
This is my all-time favorite author portrait, and I've got it here. And before I show you, I'll just say a bit about. So I've got it in a frame because I love it so much. Had it framed, not of me, by the way. I don't have a frame of my own. Look at my own terrible author photo. Backlisted listeners know, because we're always talking about, I'm a huge fan of the late novelist Anita Bruckner, who won the Booker Prize for Hotel du Lac in 1984. And I've long maintained that she gets a bad rep for being, her reputation is for writing thin, parched novels about spinsters who live in mansion blocks in South Kensington. And to be fair, there is an element of truth to that. Yes. But they're also so beautifully written. And she has a brilliantly Eeyore-ish, to me, my sense of it, very Eeyore-ish sense of humor. So they're very mordant and kind of, I mean, before his disgrace, we might perhaps have said similar to Morrissey or Philip Larkin or somebody like that. It's a kind of...
I love before his disgrace.
Well.
No, we have all, I think, universally agreed that, he's on the back burner, isn't he? Yeah.
Or Stuart Lee. It's that grumpy, that very... Yeah. Anyway, Eeyore is the originator of this. Anyway, there's quite a few awkward author pictures of Anita Bruckner.
But none more awkward.
But this one is utterly magnificent, and I'll tell you about it. I'm just going to see, can you...
Oh, I think I've seen that picture.
Is that a
has she got a cereal bowl in front of her?
That's an ashtray
bowl
full
of stubbed out fag butts.
Stubbed out butts.
In a horrible blue chair in her flat in
She
South
looks like she's in
Kensington.
a care home.
Yes, I'm afraid she does. She's also looking at you as if to say, why don't you fuck off? Yeah. in a slightly waspish, polite way. Just go away. Stop taking this photograph of me.
But the idea that the front of the frame is the ashtray with the cigarette butts.
Yeah,
the funniest thing.
And it's all those blues. And anyway, I love that.
I had to write a thing. I'm going to ask you this, Andy, because it really interests me. Because these two worlds. I had to write a thing this week. It's the 50th anniversary of Carole King's Tapestry. Carole King's Tapestry. We all know what the cover of that record looks like, do we? It's got her in her front room.
There's a cat, isn't there?
There's a cat in the foreground, and she's got a tapestry, and it's just, there's no stylist. There's one photographer turned up and took it. How is it that kind of picture is sort of oddly charismatic, even though she's not? Whereas if you'd taken the same picture of an author, which you might well have done, it just looks like an author. Why do authors look like authors and musicians look like rock stars? And they can be the same basic materials at work in both cases. But Mark and I always used to say this on magazines. Pictures of authors, they all look like librarians. They all do. It doesn't matter who they are. They all look like...
How dare you, he said, wearing his tank top and his thick glasses. How dare you, sir?
How very dare you.
But it's true.
They don't look warm and exciting company. How many times do you look at a picture of an author and think, I'd love to go and have a pint with him?
Absolutely.
Whereas Carole King, you look at that picture and think,
I don't know. I think, look, that's like, you can see Carole King there, can't you? I mean, that's like, it's what I like. Funnily enough, David, I don't disagree. But what I like about this picture is, so there's a print of this in the National Portrait Gallery. It was taken.
I thought I'd seen it before.
By Lucy, a photographer called Lucy Ann Dickens, who very kindly contacted me and said, "Would you like me to run you a copy?"
Oh, that's brilliant.
But I think what I like about this picture, apart from Professor Bruckner's total disdain for her potential readers and anyone looking at the picture, is it's in context. So the Carole King photo is in context, right? It's Carole. I assume at something that, if it isn't her home, it's her home. Yeah, we're meant to think her home, right? And we know this is Professor Bruckner's home. I think a lot of authors, I mean, I'm so grateful to we're so thankful rather that we can do these things digitally, because I think there is an opportunity for authors now to just have a bit more fun with it and get their photos taken in rooms that aren't merely white with them doing that. There's a And why
you can almost hear a voice in that picture going, would you like a biscuit? And there's boxing on the telly and you like boxing.
Would you like enough? Would you like a game of Hancock or Jaws? Which should it be? You had you had Peter Curran on here. I
Yeah,
really
yeah.
enjoyed that episode. Really
It was
like
very good.
it was very good. And he told a story about a really good story about getting something signed by Peter Cook. Which I don't want to spoil. I don't want to spoil that story.
Yeah,
so people go and watch it. Right? But it reminded me.
I've forgotten the punchline, but I will
Peter
go.
Cook spends ages writing it, and he just can't wait.
Don't tell us.
I know, no, we won't say.
So,
You'll have to watch it to find out.
So that reminded me of a few. So that reminded me of a thing that I can illustrate. But I've also reminded me of a brilliant Peter Cook story.
Oh, God.
I said I worked in bookshops in the 90s. I had a friend who worked in the Hampstead branch of Waterstones,
Right.
Peter Cook's local bookshop.
Yeah.
And lots of famous people would, of course, go into Hampstead Waterstones, as you can imagine. Many of them looking for their book and asking.
Looking for their books to get really cross.
Yes, absolutely. But Peter Cook would often seek refuge in Waterstones because there was a woman who lived locally who had developed a strong attachment to him. And if she saw him in the street, she would follow him shouting, "Peter! Peter, why won't you look at me, Peter? Peter!" And she was barred from Waterstones Hampstead. So if that happened, he would like, jog down the street and pop into Waterstones. And he used to come in and they could hear the woman outside go, "Peter, Peter, turn round, Peter." And he would say to my friend, Look what fame has brought me. Look at the gifts that fame has bestowed upon me. Peter, why don't you talk to me, Peter?
You got the accent just right. The gifts that fame has bestowed upon me. That's precisely what he would have said.
See, the gift of fame.
Yeah.
But so Peter's story reminded me of that, but it reminded me of I've got a couple of items here which I thought you could develop this in a theme on here, which is when you approach a hero for an autograph and they respond with abuse, because I've got a couple of these.
Oh, go on.
I've got a birthday card from Julian Cope which says there,
Andy dude. Yeah.
And when I opened it up, it says, "Happy birthday, Andy, you bloody sod, Julian Cope."
He's all heart.
Obviously, I'm fiercely proud of. But I've got another one. I've got another one here. So here is a copy of Richard E. Grant's memoir, With Nails.
Terrible title.
Have either of you ever read this book?
Yes,
I've never read that. No.
It's very funny. It was published about 25 years ago. And so I remember there was a launch or a big reading for this book and talk that Richard E. Grant gave somewhere like the Almeida. It was in a theatre. It was in Islington anyway. And owing to a publisher error, there were no copies of the book for sale. Which obviously, as you may have been familiar with your own...
he would have had a good reason to be pissed off if pissed off he was. But anyway, carry on. Yeah.
So I'd already bought the book, so I brought this copy with me. But also, I'd read the book in manuscript because we'd been sent an early copy, and the manuscript. I was quite surprised when the finished book arrived because it was so thin, because the manuscript had been that big.
Oh, really?
And it had been legaled down to that.
Oh, have you still got it?
I have actually. Don't tell anyone. This won't go anywhere. Right. Anyway. So Richard talks very charmingly about the book. And then they said, "Are there any questions?" And so I like the 20-something wise guy I was, I stuck up my hand and said, "Yes, I've got a question. Are there any stories that you included in the original manuscript that were too hot to put in the finished book?" Right. And I got a little laugh, and Richard goes, "Ha, ha, ha, ha." So afterwards, I approach him with this book and I say, "Richard, could you," he said, "Where did you get that?" Where did you get that? I said, well, I bought it anyway. Oh, right, okay, yeah. I said, I'm sorry about the question. Oh, it's fine. And so I gave him the book, and he like, this is what Peter's story reminded me of. Richard, you're not spending a while writing in the book. And I was thinking, I wonder what this is going to be. So we get out of the Almeida and we're walking down Upper Street. And my wife said to me, what's he put? So we opened the book and he'd written, "For Andy, you terrible cunt, Richard E. Grant." Now, obviously that's a quote from Withnell, but it seemed to
Monty,
be,
isn't it? That's right, yeah.
It seemed appropriate to the moment. Again, absolutely delighted.
That's affectionate. That really is. That's brilliant.
I met Mark E. Smith once through our mutual friend, the writer Dave Haslam, and Dave said to me, "Oh, this is Mark. This is Andy Miller." And Mark Smith went, "Ah, are you Greek or are you Roman?" And I went, I absolutely no. To this day, I don't know the extent of which that was an insult or not. I was delighted, of course, delighted.
Right.
No idea what he meant by that.
I think there may have been some speculation about my sexuality going on, but I mean, we'll never know. We'll never know. Now, I've got another thing here.
Oh, go on.
This is, can you see that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
This is a thing I dug this out because I wanted to ask you guys about XTC and about early smash hits. So this is the book. This is the the XTC songbook that came out in the early 80s. And it's got the words and extremely difficult chords to all their singles up to Respectable Street. So it came out just before their biggest hit, Senses Working Overtime. And one of the things that they've done to bulk out the book is include quotes from interviews with Andy Partridge and Colin Moulding and Terry Chambers from the music papers, because XTC was such a funny group and could give such a great quote. And I'm sure, I mean, I love XTC, and I'm sure my love of them came from, reading smash hits from 1979 onwards, because you used to feature them a lot, didn't you?
Well, they were always in their favour. Ian Cranner, who was the editor before I was always a big fan, and they always gave good quotes, and they were always game for a laugh.
They were really fun. We did a thing with Andy on his collection of toy soldiers. Remember that, Dave? In one of the yearbooks. And in fact, we had him on this podcast, not long ago, just talking about going back to the attic, getting out all this extraordinary collection of plastic gifts that were free in cereal packets from the 1960s. You've probably seen it, But I can remember him back then just coming up with amazing quotes. He described their first album as being Captain Beefheart meets the Archies. That was the kind of thing that he'd throw into the mix. Was that what was called white music? I can't remember now. Yeah.
And he's like, there's some really funny, there's a quote for here from this always, because, XTC, they're really kind of, there are lots of difficult chords in this, none of which are correct because they used all kind of horrible tunings. But they're also really funny. There's this quote, this is from the Melody Maker, 8th of March, 1981. And Partridge is talking about, he's been asked, do XTC get any groupies? And he says, I won't do the Swindon Burr. He says, anyway, she came backstage at the Mud Club. A real vamp she was. Dog collar, blue hair, white face, leather miniskirt, handcuffs, bondage magazine under one arm. Her eyes said, whip me. I thought, hello, she's not here to learn the chords to Rhodes Girdle the Globe.
The key thing about XTC during the late 70s, early 80s, when they were on the road, was that the head of press at Virgin Records was dear old Al Clark. And Al was rather grand, he was the Derek Taylor of Virgin.
He was.
Immensely quotable, very funny guy. And Al used to spend most of his time in the office organising everything. But XTC were his personal thing. And so whenever XTC went somewhere like Australia or somewhere really far flung,
Al would go with them.
Al would go with them
Yeah.
and take, very often, Alan Jones from the Melody Maker would go with them.
Yeah, okay.
And basically, because if you went on the road with XTC, they were the kind of dream of the on-the-road piece. Because everything they said, you could write down. Everything they said was funny or perceptive. And so Alan would come back with these pieces that were running the Melody Maker over like 3 parts.
They were absolutely.
I've got a quote here in the same book, Dave. I think about it. I've actually said this to people as a way of dealing with expectations when their book comes out or their or whatever, their podcast. And this is from an Alan Jones Melody Maker piece with XTC in Australia in 1979. Right, here you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Colin Moulding asks Larry, the promoter, whether he thinks XTC will prove to be popular with audiences throughout Australia. Colin, Larry replies, wetting his throat again, Jesus Christ was the Son of God and he was nailed to 2 butts of wood. So what chance have you got of being liked by everyone? So, so
being a musician, you've probably seen those that footage that Andy Partridge has done where he impersonates all his favorite guitar players. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah. I mean,
it's amazing. And he grew up sort of loving people like Rory Gallagher, as anybody kind of our age did, and he can do these perfect impersonations of Rory Gallagher and Jerry Garcia. Jerry Garcia he describes as donkey-like.
He's a really, they as a group, they're a really interesting example of a group who in a different era 4 or 5 years earlier could have very easily played on their virtuosity, right? That would have been part of their thing, but they come up with a 60s sensibility in punk and new wave.
Yeah.
And so they bend it all towards chords and production and songwriting rather than instrumental dexterity. It's very, very.
When they got to Dukes of Stratosphere, that kind of broke out, really, didn't it? Because they could have done that.
And I wanted to ask you, I've always wanted to know this. So I started buying smash hits in 1979 as an alternative to Disco 45.
Yeah.
Right? For the song words. That was the thing, right? And I'm really interested to know, smash hits seem to follow the trajectory of punk in how it looked and the bands it wrote about. Punk, new wave, two-tone, new pop. You went through all those things before then, and you're kind of in sync with the Inky music press from the same period, and then it starts to diverge from about 1984 onward.
Yeah, well, I think Paul Denoyer, who's kind of old colleague and mate of ours who worked at the NME during that time, Paul was the first person to point out to me that what happened. If you look in 1983 or 84, if you look at the cover stars of Smash Hits and the cover stars of the NME, very often the same people.
Yeah.
It's the Jam, it's Ian Dury, it's whatever. And then you get, so it was the NME deciding, oh God, we can't play in that playground anymore.
Wow.
We've got to go over here and be somehow more serious. And, and that's what they did. And they kind of, it was Joy Division and so forth.
It was Joy Division. It was the Redskins. It was kind of political anarchic punk rock. The real change, as Dave was saying, was kind of Duran Duran. I think it was Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, because they just couldn't deal with that. They couldn't process it. They didn't approve of it, and also it didn't look any good. Because if you printed a picture of Duran Duran on smudgy old newsprint, it looked absolutely terrible. But it was in Smash Hits in the face. It looked fabulous.
But those initial, like those 79 to 82 or 78 to 82, whatever. That kind of the look of the magazine, that kind of Jamie Reed. There's a kind of watered down Jamie Reed logo, right? Is that coming from? Is that a publishing decision or an editorial decision, or just the enthusiasm of the writers?
That was the art designer, Steve Bush.
Steve Bush, he was the art director. When I first joined Smash Hits in 79, Steve was already there, and I think he was only about 19 at the time. He'd left art school.
Okay.
He'd been running a little business up in Lincolnshire.
Selling t-shirts,
designing and selling kind of mod t-shirts, I think, as much as anything else. And Steve was that's the sort of thing he did. And also, don't forget, there's a lot of this is to do with the technology that was involved in print in those days. No computers, clearly. And so everything was cut out and letter set and stuck together, in a very kind of studenty way,
It's just really interesting that, so I've started buying the magazine. I should have dug it out. My little Elvis Costello badge,
the button,
which is taken from Get Happy. They're very
you really were an early adopter.
Well, I'm just totally fascinated because
if you look at those early covers, there's some extraordinary people on them. There's the Professionals, which was a splinter group, a trio formed by Cook and Jones, I think.
Well, that was Ian. That was Jockey Granner's kind of utter obsession with the Sex Pistols.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Do you know the group that now when they popped up on the Top of the Pops repeats on BBC Four, or I see them on the cover of Smash Hits, they seem to have come in from some totally other universe who they probably never would have broken through at any other time. And yet there's something still really confrontational about them.
God, what year? I want to guess who this is.
81, first hit in 81. Do you want a clue? There's two of them. There's two of them.
Oh, Eurythmics? No.
No. Soft Cell.
Soft Cell.
Okay.
Soft Cell seemed like the most nasty, seedy, but incredibly imaginative, but also sonically really challenging. This really sparse sounding electronica with this wonderful flamboyant front man with a catalogue of songs about these terrible seedy environments. And
yes. Bed-sitters.
Wow.
Yeah. But also neither of them, no disrespect, but neither of them a great oil painting, were there? I mean, there's no major looker in Soft Cell,
Still Tainted, I think to this day, Tainted Love, the longest running single in the American charts ever.
Is it really?
It is.
Incredibly.
It stayed there for years.
Yeah.
And the story of how that, well, I think I've mentioned it in my book, that, it started off as a kind of, it was a flop in the States, wasn't it? And then years later, Mark Armour heard it in a club in Leeds and got the DJ to run him off a copy of it on a tape.
Yeah.
And then they just went and did their inversion. And then that goes back to America 20 years later. Dave, it turns out to be the longest running hit single in America of any kind ever to this day. It's remarkable, really.
Yeah, it is.
I interviewed Dave Ball when his autobiography came out, and one of the themes of his autobiography is how they he and Mark have tried to reach a kind of a settlement, a peaceful reconciliation with their own past, not with one another, with the fact that nobody said to them, when you put out this Tainted Love song as a single, you might want to have one of your own songs on the B-side.
And they didn't.
They didn't. They've got another cover version. I think they've got a cover version. Where Did My Love Go? They lost. They lost.
That hurts.
They never make much money off of Tainted Love.
Oh, my God. Appalling.
Yeah. Nobody, because, they're on Some Bizarre, aren't they? Which is itself a fairly full-on.
God, I can remember the Frankie Goes to Hollywood when Paul Morley was working with him. I think he managed to get something with his own copyright onto a B-side of a Frankie Goes to Hollywood single. I think it might have been him actually interviewing them or something. But he managed to get some kind of royalty out of it. Quite rightly, because they were having number one records. Oh, that's heartbreaking.
But yeah, and I can remember them being on Top of the Pops and on Smash Hits, and they would have been in the NME, but I wasn't reading the NME at that point. So
again, the person who was really keen on Soft Cell was Steve Bush, wasn't he, Mark?
Yeah, he was. Yeah,
Steve Bush loved Soft Cell, absolutely loved them, and so they're always in the magazine.
It was a brilliant time, though. Absolutely brilliant. You get pictures of Martin Gore of Depeche Mode in a rubber dress would come into the office. We'd go, great, this is fantastic. Let's make this out.
I can remember you doing. There was like a Christmas flexi that you did, which.
David and I were involved with that. Yeah.
Right. It's got like it obviously had that kind of Beatles fan club thing, but you'd gone round and got little interviews with.
That's exactly what it was. It's
You
very
got
like
Kevin
the last
Rowland. You got Kevin Rowland to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. That was no mean feat.
I can still remember I was the guy doing the recording, and David and Trevor Dan produced that, you know. But there's a very bit where I got Paul Weller. He said, "It's Paul Weller here." He said, "But don't let that stop you enjoying yourself." So funny. It was so knowing. They knew precisely what their kind of, you know, how people regarded them, you know, played up to that. It's fantastic.
But we often say, you know, when you look back at Smash Hits, you look back at the yearbooks or whatever, and you think, boy, you couldn't do that nowadays. You just could not, because, you know, the whole kind of identity politics thing just cuts across it nowadays. You know what I mean? Whereas people wore whatever they wore it very lightly in those days. You know, nobody ever said, as a so-and-so, I have to say so-and-so. Nobody ever said that. They all just kind of...
And they would agonize about the song they had to sing. You know, at that time, they all sang a song. They all sang something that was... I had to go back and re-record some because it was out of... Somebody sang White Christmas because it wasn't out of copyright. We had to go back and get Silent Night or something. You know, Duran Duran, I think.
You know what? There's another reason for me why this is such a golden period. I mean, clearly, I love the magazine and I love the way people wrote about music in that era. And but I also, the thing that I was really influential on me, and I do think if you were my age, we were really lucky to grow up in this era. No irony to this at all. Pop stars read books, and not only did they read books, it was sort of it was cool. Even if they didn't read them, it was cool to talk about books.
Well, Paul Weller, there's a picture of Paul Weller on the back of Smash Hits with a copy of 1984, wasn't it?
On the last issue of 1983, if I'm not correct. It
was December 1983, and he's reading 1984, the paperback.
And going back to your XTC, which is how we started.
Thanks to Paul Weller.
We started this talking about XTC. One of the great things about XTC as interviewees, and you could say the same thing about Ian Dury, was that they had a huge hinterland, which they were quite happy talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas they were surrounded by groups like The Clash or whatever, who were not comfortable talking about it because they felt they'd give themselves away.
Yeah.
You know
right. But also, this is the difference here between, say, like, you know, George Harrison writes a song called "Be Here Now," and that's based on his own journey, his seeking, his reading of philosophy, and checking out comparative religions, and you know, and going on this incredible head spinning voyage into himself and out again. Whereas when Oasis make an album called "Be Here Now," it's because George Harrison wrote a song called "Be Here Now."
Absolutely.
Yes, Wonderwall, exactly the same.
Total shrinking of openness, actually, openness to other things. Like you say, all these people had this hinterland. And like I saw you were talking, Dave, on Twitter about Scritti Politti, because Scritti Politti had a song in 82 or 83 called Jacques Derrida, as they sang it, rather than Jacques Derrida. Derrida. Well, I can tell you, the fact that Scritti Politti wrote songs about those things was really influential on.
Yeah, made
a lot of people went out and read them. Yeah,
because there it was. I didn't know who any of these people were, but
no.
there was the little nudge to go and find out.
Yeah,
well, it's like Enemy. Enemy was a huge kind of educational tool for a lot of people who just, you know, that's what they were reading at school, but they were learning a huge amount. And Smash Hits had a lot of it too, actually. Smash Hits was very literary, you know.
It's extraordinary.
I know, it really is.
Say, the stuff in Smash Hits, there is nobody who isn't in Smash Hits at some time.
Who was that group? Someone was writing in with astonishment that some group was in Smash Hits the other day. Who was it, Dave? Can you remember?
Oh God,
Chelsea or something. I can't remember. There was some kind of a
but
you know,
was it the Anti-Nowhere League?
Yes, it was. I think
was it? Yeah,
I think it was, wasn't it? I think it was.
It wasn't.
Was it?
Anyway, the point being that everybody was in Smash Hits, and everybody was given a fair crack of the whip in Smash Hits.
Yeah,
you know, everybody was taken as seriously or as lightly as, you know, they deserved. Really, you know.
I mean, I suppose you can see it in your former colleague Neil Tennant. You know, the fact that Pet Shop Boys will write a song about pretty much anything if
absolutely.
if Neil thinks it's interesting, if it's in a book that he's been reading, or it references another,
Yeah.
So should we?
So look, go on. What else have you? What else
Come
have you
on,
got,
this
Andy?
is
And then
fantastic.
we're going to see your greatest record ever.
Your greatest record.
got-
This is an epic recording.
So what I've got is I've got backups for these as well. Do you want to see? I won't show you I won't show you the greatest record first.
No,
I'll show you this because I thought you'd love to see this.
Right, go on.
I dug this out today just because I thought it would make you laugh. Do you see what that is?
Elvis Presley's golden hits.
Ross McManus.
Oh my God! It's Father Elvis. How fantastic!
It's Elvis Costello's dad singing the hits of Elvis Presley. There he is with the glasses. There's Ross McManus.
Fantastic. And was that before Elvis Costello was known? Presumably.
Oh yeah, like this is like early. This looks like late 50s, early 60s.
No, a bit later than that.
McManus.
Yeah.
So many of the current wave of singers hail from Merseyside. So this must be early 60s, right? And it was typical of Ross McManus to manage to be born right in fashion. And then there's some stuff about Ross, and it's all blue suede shoes, Suspicious Minds, all shook up.
What label is that? You see, it's got to be later than that. If it's got Suspicious Minds on it, I'm saying early 70s. I'm just.
Oh, you're right.
You're
quite right. You're quite right. It's on Pickwick.
There you go. Pies.
Hallmark, and Pickwick.
Another Pies.
Have you read Elvis's memoir?
It's
about this thick, isn't it?
I have listened to some of it on.
There's just lovely bits about him at the age of 9, going to places like Hammersmith Palais and watching it, describing the smell of old tobacco and spilt beer in these old dance halls, watching his father and the orchestra play. It's really brilliant.
I can remember watching. I mean, it must be in the BBC archive. There's of Elvis and Ross duetting with a big band on something like The Late Show or a version of Georgia on My Mind, and it's a hands down win for the dad.
Yeah. Oh, really?
I mean, I love Elvis Costello, but and perhaps they're singing it in Dad's key and not so much in Elvis's key.
Yeah.
But you can hear that Elvis is singing from there, and Dad is singing from here, and Dad can really put some welly into it. And presumably Elvis is trying to fit round Dad as well. It's really fascinating. I don't think Elvis sings the backing vocals on Secret Lemonade Drinker, doesn't he? I think I'm right in saying
something like that.
So all right, so shall I show? This is the greatest record ever made.
Go on.
All right, okay.
And Dave is instrumental in me owning this particular copy.
All right, okay.
So here we go. The greatest record ever made is Wichita Lineman by Glenn Campbell.
Right.
Very good.
Oh, yes.
No, well, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
And there is the signature of the song's author, Jimmy Webb.
Did you get that when we did that? I did that thing at that bookshop.
Yeah, Jimmy, you saw his autobiography earlier. I'm a huge fan of Jimmy Webb as a songwriter. And we'll talk about this record in a minute, why I particularly chose that record. But yeah, I came to, when he had his autobiography out, you interviewed him, didn't you, Dave?
In
Waterstones in Kensington High Street.
Yeah.
And had you interviewed him before? It was a great interview. And he seemed fairly relaxed, but
he was fine. He was all right. Yeah. I don't think I'd interviewed him before. Anyway, no, he was very nice.
I think one of the things about Jimmy Webb that people forget, like we associate Jimmy Webb we assume like he was maybe the same age as Glenn Campbell. He's writing these easy listening things, and he's recording records. He's writing songs for Richard Harris, like MacArthur Park, Fifth Dimension, Up and Away. He's not very hip, Jimmy Webb. But the thing about Jimmy Webb is he's like 22 when he's making these records.
Yeah.
Kid.
Such an old head on, absolutely.
It's incredible. And he always says about Wichita Lineman, he never finished it. He never wrote the third. He never wrote the third verse, although he may since have written one. But
they'd already done it, hadn't they?
Yeah, they just went and did it. But I think it's the absence of the third verse is almost the thing that gives enough space for everybody else to excel. The production, the arrangement, the vocal. it is, what is it, 2.5 minutes?
Yeah.
Wrecking Crew playing the instruments, Alda Laurie doing the string arrangement. And it seems to plug into this incredible sense of yearning. You know, talk about homesickness, Mark. What is that? What is that record if not absolute weeping homesickness?
I interviewed him once and he told me about writing that, which he must have done a billion times. But the thing that struck me again is that he was 22 and he was just, I think, in the car, wasn't he? He sees the wires and he sees the guy up the wire mending the wires and suddenly gets the idea that he's listening into these distant conversations. And that's the entry point for the song, isn't it? That's such an original thought.
But also it's
incredible.
It comes about because Glenn Campbell's had a hit on By the Time I Get to Phoenix. And
Yeah.
Glenn rings.
Song.
Yeah, they need another song, but another one with a place name in
the
it.
city,
Yes.
please.
Yeah.
So Jim says, sure, just I think Wichita, bang. He's finished it by lunchtime. It's true.
Yeah.
Gets up in the morning, writes it, turns it in, says, I haven't finished. And as you say, Dave, Glenn Campbell goes, no trouble, son, we've already recorded it.
It's fun. We've done it. That's right. Exactly. Incredible.
The great thing about everybody involved in that is not a single one of them will have regarded themselves as an artist. They will all have thought of themselves as craftsmen. And if you watch the film of The Wrecking Crew, you must have seen the documentary Wrecking Crew, where they go back and they talk to Carol Kay and Hal Blaine and all these people. And I think it's Carol Kay who plays bass on it.
Yeah,
it is.
And somebody said, "Yes, he just needs something at the beginning," and so she just goes,
yeah.
You think, and then they go off to lunch, and then in the afternoon they're doing the Flintstones.
But I'm really interested in. So I think I mean, I would have heard it on radio too, or whatever. But I seem to remember it would have been late 80s. I think I might have bought Best of Glenn Campbell, and some of which is no good, and some of which is terrific. But I noticed that all the songs by Jim Webb were the terrific ones. So I thought, that's interesting. Yeah. I should. So I just thought I'd show you like some of the strange places that liking Jimmy Webb has taken me. There's Southern Nights by Glenn Campbell.
Oh, right.
Although Southern Nights is by Alan Toussaint.
It's Alan Toussaint, isn't it?
But like this is from 1977. This has got songs. This has got a version of God Only Knows on it by Brian Wilson.
He was a member of the Beach Boys, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Sunflower by Neil Diamond and some Jim Webb songs. But that's quite a good, that's quite a good record. I got one of Jim's solo albums there.
Oh yes,
colon on.
Oh, makes you think. Yeah, we're back to the author picture again, aren't we? Chin stroking.
We've got this is fascinating. There's the Fifth Dimension. That's their first album, going up and away in their beautiful balloon. Up they go.
Oh, lovely.
Here they are, 5 years later, earthbound. They've crashed back to right there, and they're puppets, right? They've been on a monkey's their head. But also, Jimmy Webb really fascinating in terms of he loved working with black singers and musicians, and he's one of the first people who has he produced and wrote all the songs on Thelma Houston's Sunshine. He after Diana Ross leaves the Supremes.
So that's right. Yeah, I haven't got that. That's the one he produced and wrote, isn't it?
Yeah, there's Jim hanging out with the Supremes at the studio. Look at
that's him with the long hair, isn't it?
Yeah. But also, because everyone covered his songs, right? The thing about Jim Webb is he is the go-between between the Beatles and all the old guard like Sinatra and Streisand and people like that. When they needed a pop hit, but that wasn't going to spook the horses too badly, they went to Jimmy Webb. Everyone recorded Jimmy Webb songs. Now look at this thing. This took me years to find. I'd only read about it in Goldmine. It's an album called Revelation by a group called Revelation. And what it is, it's the music. It's described as the music of Jim Webb in a new setting by Revelation. And if you listen to it, they've chosen all his maddest and most Christian songs, right, in a suite. It's almost like it was a cult. It's got that weird late 60s, early 70s I don't know. I don't want to say anything too dark, but it's kind of like if you dropped out but wanted to stay square, you could listen to this album, Revelation,
Yeah.
Jerusalem, This Is Your Life, Shepherd's Daughter. If this was the last song, Psalm 150, See You, then. Guess what? It's terrific. It's kind of like Christian propaganda swingle singers. It's absolutely terrific. So
there's probably a section in Rough Trade East now called Christian propaganda.
Yeah, mad Christian. Yes, exactly.
But that's one of the thrilling things about, I don't know. You see somebody talking about an author you haven't heard of, and you can follow that up, or you get a copy of all the things. You start with Wichita Lineman, and you end up on the hard stuff.
Yeah,
a little. That's the gateway drug.
Yeah, a little puff on Glenn.
The first one's free.
Yeah.
Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Oh. It's a lifeline.
I thought that was terrific.
I thought we'd never get you out of your shell, but as soon as we did, a little bit more confidence. He'll talk. He'll have things to say, and it's been brilliant.
Thanks, Andy. You terrible cunt.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a View.